My son punched me square in the face just because his wife whispered something in his ear. I didn't cry. I looked into his eyes and realized I wasn't his mother anymore. I was an obstacle. But if you think this is just another family drama, you're dead wrong. Subscribe now so you don't miss our next jaw-dropping true story episodes. The house at the end of Elmwood Street had been there long before most of the city around it was built. Nestled beneath the drooping branches of an old oak tree, its paint had peeled into stories, its porch sagged like a tired sigh, and its windows, though smudged with dust and time, still caught the morning light in a way that made you wonder what they had seen. Ruby Whitaker lived inside that house. 74 years old, silver hair coiled in a practical bun, glasses perched low on the bridge of her nose. She kept to herself, not because she hated people, though lately she wasn't sure she liked them either, but because time had a way of folding in on itself when no one came around anymore. Her steps were slow but deliberate, her voice soft but steady. Everything about her said, "I've endured more than I'll ever tell you." Every morning she brewed a single cup of black tea, no sugar, no cream, and took it to the front porch. She'd sit on the same creaky rocking chair her father had built back when he still believed anything made by hand could outlast grief. And maybe he'd been right. The chair had survived war illness and 3 generations of Whitakers. It was still here. Ruby looked out onto the street. Elmwood wasn't the same anymore. The corner store had become a vape shop. The old library had closed. Across the street, 3 houses had already been leveled for a luxury condo project. Construction signs promised modern living with historic charm. Ruby scoffed at the irony every time she read that line. She took a sip of tea and let her eyes drift to the oak tree. It stood tall in her front yard, its branches fanned wide like arms in embrace. Her father had planted it the day she was born. He said you were small and fragile and way too quiet, her mother had once told her. So he gave you a tree that would grow loud for you. She remembered the letter her mother wrote to her on her 10th birthday. Ruby still kept it folded carefully in the drawer beside her bed. The ink had faded, but she knew every word by heart. It was about strength and softness, and how sometimes the world would confuse one for the other. Her mother had known what this house would become, both a shield and a prison. The world had moved on from Ruby, and Ruby had let it. But the house had stayed. And lately the world had begun to circle back, this time with blueprints and bulldozers. She heard them again that morning, voices from across the street. Not the warm greetings of familiar neighbors, but clipped, calculated tones, suits with clipboards, developers, investors. That was the word now. Investors. Like money could grow roots and claim a place. "Is she still living there?" one man asked. "Hasn't left in months, far as I know," another said. "She'll be the last holdout," a woman added. "You watch. They always think it's their birthright." Ruby took another sip, not flinching. She'd heard it all before. Whispers on sidewalks, emails. She never answered notes left on her mailbox with fake smiles and fake offers. She stood slowly and went back inside. The kitchen was neat, worn, and filled with things that still worked, even if they weren't new. A kettle on the stove, a chipped porcelain clock, a stack of newspapers that had outlived their stories. Ruby's world had its own gravity, and everything in it stayed right where she needed it. From the window above the sink, she watched a movement in the yard. It was quick, subtle, a flash of denim and dirt. She didn't need to look twice. It was the boy again. He was small, maybe 10, with a backpack far too big for his frame and shoes that looked like they'd lost a fight with the rain. He crept beneath the low branches of the oak tree and reached up, snagging 2 red apples from the higher limbs. He was fast, efficient. This wasn't his first visit. Ruby didn't say a word. She didn't open the door or knock on the glass. She just watched. The boy stuffed the apples into his bag and turned to leave, but paused. For the first time, he looked directly at the window. They locked eyes. Ruby didn't smile. Neither did he. But there was something in the moment, some silent exchange. Not of guilt, not of fear. Just recognition. Then he was gone, slipping back through the gap in the fence like a fox returning to the woods. Later that afternoon, Ruby sat with her photo albums spread across the dining table. She wasn't nostalgic, not in the way most people imagined. She didn't weep over lost youth or replay old conversations in her head, but sometimes she needed to remember why she stayed. She turned the pages slowly. Her parents' wedding, her own high school graduation, the only photo she had with her daughter taken when she was still a toddler, long before the silence between them grew too wide to bridge. Some losses weren't loud. Some didn't come with funerals or slammed doors. Some just drifted away year after year until the space they left felt like it had always been there. At around 5, the shadows on the porch grew longer. Ruby opened the front door, letting the cool air in. She stepped outside and saw it immediately, a small brown paper bag resting on the top step. She looked left then right. No one. Inside the bag was a sandwich, peanut butter and jelly wrapped in plastic, and a note scrawled in messy handwriting. "Thanks for the apples. You dropped one. It didn't bruise." No name, no return address. Ruby held the sandwich in her hand like it was something sacred. She hadn't received a handwritten note in years, not since before her daughter stopped returning letters, not since the city started replacing everything real with screens and sound bites. She looked out at the street again. Somewhere behind one of those crumbling fences or cracked sidewalks, that boy existed. He had seen her, not just her house, not just the old woman in the window, but her. It had been so long since someone had looked and truly seen her. That night, Ruby couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the sounds of the city. Distant sirens whined, rustling leaves, the creak of the house settling into its bones. And beneath it all, something else. A low hum of change, like a train coming from far away. She didn't know yet what it meant, but she could feel it. The next morning she placed a basket at the base of the oak tree filled with apples. No sign, no invitation, just the fruit. She returned to the porch and waited. Across the street behind a rusted gate, a curtain shifted, and the house at the end of Elmwood Street stood quietly, as it always had, holding its breath. Not out of fear, but out of knowing. Because sometimes the smallest ripple breaks the longest silence. And Ruby Whitaker, she was done being silent. The knock came at 9:17 a.m., 3 raps, sharp, deliberate. Not the hesitant kind that belonged to lost children or mailmen. No, this was the knock of someone who already felt entitled to be let in. Ruby didn't move right away. She sat at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea, her eyes fixed on the dust particles dancing through the morning light. The knock came again, this time louder, more insistent. The kind that didn't ask, it demanded. She rose slowly. No rush. The house had seen men like this before. When she opened the door, a man in a slim navy blue suit stood on her porch, holding a leather folder and smiling in that way corporate men always smiled, teeth but no sincerity. "Mrs. Whitaker," he asked. She said nothing. "I'm Daniel Reese. I represent Glenwood Developments." He extended his hand. She looked at it like it was a dead leaf. Undeterred, he shifted his weight, cleared his throat, and opened the folder. "We've been trying to get in touch regarding your property. I believe you've received our letters." "I burned most of them," Ruby said calmly. Reese let out a soft chuckle as if that were cute. "Well, I admire your resilience, truly, but I wanted to come by in person and explain the opportunity we're offering you." He pulled out a single sheet of paper from the folder and held it up like a prize ribbon. "Here's the deal. We're proposing a very generous buyout well above market value, enough for you to relocate somewhere quieter, more modern, and you'd be contributing to the revitalization of the neighborhood." She stared at the paper but didn't take it. "I'm not interested," she said, her voice steady. "Mrs. Whitaker." "Ruby, may I call you that?" "No." He smiled again, this time tighter. "This is a chance to make your life easier. These homes are old. You shouldn't have to worry about repairs or yard work at your age. We've made similar offers to the rest of your neighbors, and most have agreed. In fact, we're holding a community meeting this evening to finalize plans. You'd be in good company." Ruby leaned slightly on the doorframe, her eyes narrowing. "This house was built by my grandfather," she said. "Every nail and beam has a story. It's not for sale." Reese sighed, lips pursed like he was disappointed in a child. "Well, I do need to inform you then that if you refuse this offer, we'll have to proceed with legal action. There are clauses in the city zoning contracts that—" "I know the clauses," Ruby cut in. He blinked. "I read the city charter. I've lived here longer than you've been alive." For a brief second, the polished salesman veneer cracked. "I see," he said finally. He slid the offer back into his folder and gave her a slow, pitying nod. "Well, I hope you'll reconsider. This deal has an expiration date." Ruby closed the door before he finished the sentence. She stood there, hand on the knob, listening to his footsteps retreat down the porch steps and along the walkway. She didn't move until the sound of his car pulling away disappeared entirely. Then she locked the door top and bottom. That evening, just before 6, Ruby received a typed invitation slipped under her door. Community Progress Meeting, 6:30 p.m. Elmwood Baptist Church. Basement attendance. Strongly encouraged. She stared at it for a long time, the words burning into her like an insult. Progress. That word had ruined more than it ever improved. But still she went. She didn't go out of hope. She went out of duty to witness how the neighborhood she had loved, protected, and tended like a child was being divided up like a chessboard. The church basement buzzed with conversation when she arrived. Folding chairs arranged in a loose circle, a whiteboard scrawled with flowcharts, a projector humming in the corner. Most of her neighbors sat in groups of 2 or 3. Some turned to look at her briefly before returning to their conversations. No one waved. No one offered a seat. She sat at the back by herself near the emergency exit. A woman named Linda, who had once borrowed sugar from her every other week, stood and began the meeting. "We want to start by thanking Glenwood Developments for being here tonight," Linda said brightly. "This is an exciting time for our neighborhood." Exciting. Ruby stared at the back of Linda's head, remembering the time she'd helped her through a panic attack during a storm, how Linda had once called her the backbone of Elmwood. Now Ruby was a speed bump in her path to a new condo with a pool and underground parking. They passed around glossy brochures showing mock-ups of what Elmwood could become. Wide sidewalks, bike lanes, rooftop patios, heritage-inspired architecture. All of it antiseptic, manicured, unreal. Then came the clipboard. They were collecting signatures, non-binding, they said, just to show interest, solidarity, vision. When it reached Ruby, she didn't even look down. She handed it to the man next to her without a word. He didn't meet her eyes. When the meeting ended, Ruby left quietly. The hallway was empty except for one small figure. Aiden. He leaned against the water fountain, arms crossed, eyes down. He looked up as she passed. For a moment their eyes locked. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just gave a single slow nod. It was the only kindness she'd been shown all night. That night Ruby didn't sleep. Not because she was afraid she was long past fear, but because something deeper stirred. A quiet rage, a grief for something not yet lost but already dying. At dawn, she opened her front door and found a small cardboard box on her steps. Inside, a half carton of milk, a wrapped sandwich, and a single granola bar. No note, no decoration, just quiet offering. She looked out toward the street, empty. But something caught her eye. Aiden, on the corner. Hoodie pulled up, backpack hanging loose, walking like he had nowhere to be. She stepped out onto the porch. "Boy," she called. He turned. They stared at each other across the morning haze. Aiden didn't run. He didn't speak. Ruby held up the milk carton. He shrugged. Then he turned to walk away. "Wait," she said. He paused. She walked down the steps slowly, her joints stiff from the night air. When she reached the sidewalk, he was still standing there. "Why'd you leave that?" she asked. He scratched the back of his neck. "You looked like someone who doesn't eat breakfast," he muttered. "You're wrong," she said. "I do, but not always well." He smirked. There was silence. "You hungry?" she asked. He looked up, surprised. "I guess." "Come on, then." He followed her inside. It was the first time in years anyone besides Ruby had crossed that threshold. He sat at the kitchen table like he didn't know how chairs worked. Slouched, nervous eyes darting to the window. Ruby made scrambled eggs, toast, and tea. She didn't ask if he liked tea. She just poured it. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that lets the walls breathe. Halfway through the meal, Aiden spoke. "They're going to take your house." Ruby didn't flinch. "They've done it before. To other people," he said. "My aunt. She used to live on Ashby. They said the roof wasn't up to code. Made her move. Said it was temporary. Never let her come back." Ruby put down her fork. "I know," she said. He looked at her, really looked. "But you ain't gonna let them, are you?" Ruby leaned back in her chair. "I'm old, not stupid, and not afraid." Aiden grinned, lopsided. Good. He stuffed the rest of his toast in his pocket. I gotta go, school. You go to school? She asked, genuinely surprised. He laughed. Sometimes. She followed him to the door. Don't leave food on my porch, she said. He blinked. You want to give me something? Knock. Okay. He opened the door, stepped outside. Hey, she called after him. He turned. I like peanut butter, she said. He smiled for the first time. Noted. Then he was gone. Ruby stood there for a long time, the morning sun warming her face. And for the first time in what felt like years, the house didn't feel quite so empty. The storm had come without warning. Thick clouds rolling in like soldiers, the sky turning the color of a bruise. Rain beat against the roof like fists, and thunder growled in the distance. Inside the old house on Elmwood, it was dim and quiet, save for the creaking of wood that had known far too many seasons. Ruby stood at the top of the basement stairs, holding a lantern in one hand and a flashlight in the other. The power had flickered and finally gone out. The fuse box was in the basement where she rarely ventured anymore. Her knees didn't like the narrow steps, and the air down there always carried a damp, earthy sadness, like the house remembered too much. Wait here, she told Aiden, who had dropped by earlier with a bottle of orange soda and a half-finished comic book tucked under his arm. He shrugged. I'll come. If you fall, I'm not strong enough to carry you. She gave him a look. He shrugged again. Just saying. Together they descended the stairs. The flashlight flickered as they went, throwing jagged shadows across the peeling walls. Cobwebs hung like forgotten curtains in the corners. Boxes, old Christmas decorations, faded photos, broken furniture lined the walls in precarious towers. I never liked it down here, Ruby muttered. It's like a horror movie, Aiden whispered. You got rats? No, but if you scream, I'll pretend I don't know you. He grinned but stayed close. At the far end of the basement, beneath a crumbling brick wall, the fuse box waited. Ruby opened it, examined the switches, and flicked them with practiced ease. The house flickered to life again, just a hum, no lights. Loose wire somewhere, she said. Figures. They turned to head back up when Aiden paused. Something near the wall had caught his attention. Hey, he said, crouching near a stack of old paint cans. What's this? What? There's something behind here. He shoved one of the paint cans aside, then another. His fingers scraped against the rough wall, searching until they hit something wood, not brick. Come here, he said. Feel that? Ruby bent closer, shining the flashlight where his fingers pointed. It was a panel just slightly raised, about the size of a shoebox lid. The edges were uneven, the grain a different color from the rest of the wall. Hidden panel, she said quietly. Aiden's eyes lit up like a secret passage. Don't get too excited. He tugged gently, then harder. The panel creaked, groaned, and then popped free in a cloud of dust and must. Behind it, a narrow cavity stretched into the wall about 2 feet deep. Inside, wrapped in a torn cloth, was a wooden box. Ruby reached in, hands trembling not from fear but something else. Reverence. Memory. The feeling that what she was about to touch had been waiting for her all along. The box was heavy, polished though now dulled by age. A small brass latch held it shut. No lock. Aiden stepped back as Ruby carried it to the nearby workbench. She opened it slowly. Inside, beneath layers of yellowing paper and waxed cloth, were documents, dozens of them, maps, letters, deeds, photographs. Time had not been kind, but the ink still held its voice. What is all this? Aiden whispered. Ruby didn't answer right away. Her hands moved carefully as if the pages might disintegrate from breath alone. She pulled out the largest document, a folded map of Elmwood drawn in ink on parchment. It was dated 1867. The lines were familiar yet strange. Streets that no longer existed, plots of land named after families she had only heard of in whispers. Then a second sheet, thicker, embossed with a faded seal. A deed. Her grandfather's name written in ornate cursive. But below it something even more remarkable, a clause detailing the donation of part of the land to a community dedicated to the upliftment of displaced persons and freedmen. Ruby's breath caught. She pulled another letter from the box, this one handwritten, shaky but formal, signed by one Reverend Josiah R. Carter. The letter spoke of a promise how the Whitaker family had agreed after the Civil War to allocate land on Elmwood Street for a safe haven for black families escaping violence in the South. A haven that was supposed to remain untouched, protected, sacred. Holy crap, Aiden whispered. Ruby looked at him sharply. Sorry, but this is huge, right? She nodded slowly, eyes glassy. I knew my family had roots here, she murmured. But this, I never knew they planted trees for others too. She sat down, legs folding with effort. Her eyes scanned the papers again and again, afraid it might all vanish. They can't build condos on this, Aiden said. Can they? Ruby shook her head. Not legally. Not if this is still valid. But will anyone believe you? Silence. That was the question, wasn't it? She had lived long enough to know the weight of proof and the slipperiness of truth. Developers didn't care about promises written in ink a century ago. They cared about loopholes, silence, erasure. They'll say it's old, she whispered. They'll say it's expired or fake or doesn't apply anymore. Aiden frowned. Then we make them care. She looked up. He was standing with his arms crossed, chin up. The same boy who'd left peanut butter sandwiches on her porch now looked like a general on the verge of war. You have to show someone, he said. News people, internet people. My teacher loves history. Maybe she knows someone. Ruby laughed, a soft, hollow sound. Sweetheart, I'm just an old woman in a house everyone wants to forget. Aiden shook his head. No, you're the one with the truth. That makes you dangerous. She blinked. Dangerous. She hadn't felt dangerous in decades. He grabbed the nearest document, holding it gently but with purpose. We can take pictures, he said, put it online. If people see this, they'll ask questions. And if they don't believe it, then we give them more. He was already rifling through the box, laying things out like an archivist. He found an old black and white photograph, men and women standing outside a wooden building, faded smiles beneath hats and headscarves. In the background, the familiar silhouette of the house on Elmwood Street. That's this house, Aiden said. Ruby nodded, tracing the outline of the porch with her finger. I think that's my great-grandmother, she whispered. For a moment, neither of them moved. The basement, usually cold and echoing, felt warmer now, like the air itself had shifted. I'll get my phone, Aiden said, already halfway up the stairs. When he returned, he helped Ruby spread out the documents on the floor, taking photo after photo, careful, methodical. Hold that corner, he'd say. Make sure there's no glare. Ruby chuckled. You've done this before. My mom used to work in archives before she got sick. I helped her scan stuff sometimes. Ruby's smile faded. I didn't know that. He shrugged, avoiding her eyes. She died 3 years ago. Cancer. I live with my aunt now, when she's sober. Ruby reached out, gently squeezed his hand. I'm sorry. Aiden nodded once, then returned to the documents. It's okay. She would have loved this stuff. She hated when people tried to erase history. They worked until the lantern began to dim, batteries running low. When they finished, they had over 100 photos, deeds, letters, maps, photographs, all saved to Aiden's phone and uploaded to a secure drive Ruby didn't fully understand. Now what, she asked. Now Aiden said we show the world what this house really is. He looked around the basement at the peeling paint and sagging beams. Not just old wood and bricks. It's proof of who came before, of what they left behind. Ruby stood slowly, her back aching, but her eyes bright. It was never just my house, she said. It was always part of something bigger. Aiden smiled. And in that moment between the shadows and the echoes, 2 generations separated by nearly 60 years and joined by a single act of discovery stood on the cusp of something neither fully understood. The fight wasn't over, but now at least they had something worth fighting with. Ruby pressed the papers flat with shaking hands. The courthouse air smelled like dust and long-lost battles, leather chairs, forgotten files, resignation. She had worn her nicest coat, the one with the faded velvet collar, and polished her shoes until the cracked leather gave a dull sheen. She hadn't stepped into City Hall in nearly 2 decades. The floors still creaked in all the same places. She sat in the reception area of the zoning department, a thick manila envelope pressed to her chest. Inside everything, maps, deeds, letters, photographs, a record of history hidden in her walls. Proof as far as she was concerned that her house wasn't just hers, it belonged to the past, and it protected a promise. A young man in khakis and a tie too bright for government work called her name, Mrs. Whitaker. She rose. This way. She followed him through a labyrinth of dull corridors until they reached a small office that looked like it had once wanted to be important and then gave up. A nameplate on the desk read, M. Keener, Municipal Zoning. Keener was a man in his 40s with a high forehead and a thin mustache that looked drawn on in haste. He didn't stand when Ruby entered, just gestured vaguely to a chair. "You brought documents," he asked, as if it were an inconvenience. She nodded and laid the envelope on his desk. "These were discovered in my home. Hidden, preserved. I believe they contain original evidence regarding the ownership and intended use of the land my house sits on." He raised an eyebrow, then opened the envelope, sliding the papers out with a kind of bureaucratic indifference. He skimmed the top few pages. Handwritten letters. Old maps. Okay. He turned one over, glanced at the signature. "This one's from 1867, she said. "It refers to a donation of the land for the benefit of freedmen and displaced persons." Keener nodded slowly, lips twitching with polite disbelief. "Right. Look, I'm not saying this isn't interesting. But this isn't the National Archives. These aren't recorded with the current county system. None of these documents are notarized. You understand. I understand the ink is old enough to outlive all of us," she said. "That should matter." He sighed. "It's just not that simple. Even if these were authentic, even if they were binding once upon a time, laws have changed. This is 2025. The parcel you occupy is zoned residential transition, which under the city's current code makes it eligible for redevelopment." She stared at him, fury rising quietly behind her calm. "So history is nothing?" she asked. "It's not that. But history isn't necessarily legally enforceable." She sat back, disgust crawling across her skin. "Then what do you enforce, Mr. Keener?" He gave her a thin smile. "I enforce what's on file." He pushed the papers back toward her like they were contaminated. "I'd advise you to seek private counsel, maybe a preservation society. But as far as this office is concerned, this documentation is non-compliant, I'm sorry." He wasn't. Ruby didn't touch the papers. She stared at him until he finally shifted uncomfortably in his chair. She rose. "I remember when this city still had a spine," she said. "Ma'am." She took the envelope and walked out back into the hallway that now smelled less like dust and more like decay. Outside, the sky was pale and bright, the kind of sunlight that makes things feel colder than they are. She stood on the steps of City Hall, envelope clutched to her chest, and let the weight of disappointment settle on her shoulders. Aiden was waiting on the bench near the bus stop, kicking at pebbles. She didn't have to say anything. He saw her face and knew. "They said no. They said the past doesn't matter unless it's already on file." He looked down. "What now?" She didn't answer right away. "Then we make noise." That evening, Aiden sat cross-legged on the living room rug, the documents spread around him like sacred texts. Ruby watched him from the armchair, an old Afghan draped over her knees, her tea untouched. Aiden adjusted his phone, setting it upright on a stack of books. He hit record. "Okay," he whispered, clearing his throat. "Here goes." The video was simple. No fancy edits, no dramatic music, just Aiden's small, serious, sincere speaking into the camera. "My name is Aiden. I'm 10 years old. I live in Boston near Elmwood Street. My friend Ruby is 74. She's lived here her whole life, but now some people want to take her house. They want to build condos where her tree is. Her dad planted that tree. He's dead now, so is her mom. But their memories live in the house. And we found some papers, real ones, that show the land was supposed to be for people who needed help. For people like me. Like her. Not for people in suits who already got everything." He held up one of the letters, zooming in slowly. "I don't know all the laws, but I know what's right. And this isn't right." He looked directly into the lens. "Please share this. Somebody out there knows what to do." He ended the recording, exhaled hard. "You think it's dumb?" he asked. Ruby shook her head. "I think it's brave." He uploaded it to his small YouTube channel. No followers, no reach. But something happened. It spread. It didn't explode. Not like a meme or a cat video. It crept quietly, insistently through inboxes, text threads, message boards. 2 days later, a student named Kayla Rojas watched it in a Harvard law classroom between lectures on property inheritance and historic district designations. She sent it to her friend Malcolm. Malcolm sent it to his professor. By Friday, 3 law students, Malcolm, Kayla, and a third named Samira, stood outside Ruby's gate. Aiden peeked through the window. "Ruby," he whispered, "we got company." She opened the door slowly. Miss Whitaker Malcolm stepped forward, nervous but respectful. "We're not selling anything, I promise." "We saw the video," Kayla added. "We're in a legal clinic at Harvard. We specialize in housing and land rights." Samira held out a hand. "We want to help." Ruby didn't speak at first. She studied their eyes, the folders clutched to their chests, the earnestness vibrating off them like heat. Finally, she stepped aside. "Come in." They sat at the dining table, reviewing the documents like sacred relics. Their energy was electric, highlighting passages, cross-referencing with statutes, snapping photographs, making rapid notes. "This letter alone is a gold mine," Kayla said. Reverend Josiah Carter was a recognized community leader. "He shows up in 3 separate archives we've studied. This map," Malcolm added, "if we can get it authenticated, could force the zoning board to hold a hearing." "We can petition for historical landmark status," Samira said. "There's precedent. Strong one. We just need media pressure." Ruby watched them work, eyes wide, with cautious hope. "What about that city man, Keener?" "We'll deal with him," Malcolm said. Samira nodded. "But we'll need the public on your side. We need to turn this into a story people care about." "We're not talking just legal filings," Kayla said. "We're talking narrative." Aiden grinned. "I can tell stories." They looked at him. "He's the one who made the video," Ruby said. Kayla smiled. "Then you started a revolution, kid." By Sunday, local news caught wind. WMBT Boston sent a crew to film Ruby on her porch. Aiden stood beside her in a new jacket Kayla had bought him. The reporter asked her, "What does this house mean to you?" Ruby looked past the camera to the oak tree in her yard, to the cracked sidewalk, the rusted mailbox. "It's not just mine," she said. "It's everyone's who was told they didn't belong." That clip aired at 6:17 p.m. Monday. By 7:02, the phones at City Hall were ringing. By Tuesday morning, someone had posted a flyer on the development office's glass doors. "History lives here, let it breathe." The development company issued a statement calling the claims unfounded and the documents suspect. But they were already on defense. The city scheduled an emergency hearing for the following week. And in the center of it all, between pressure and paperwork, between memory and momentum, sat Ruby holding her teacup like a weaponized clear spine straight. The system had tried to silence her, but justice, even whispered, had found its way into the air, and this time the world was starting to listen. The knock on the door that morning was softer. No suits, no threats, just a polite rhythm, 3 taps, respectful, patient. Ruby opened it and found a man in his 60s, standing on the porch. Round glasses fogged from the cold, a leather satchel hanging from one shoulder. He looked like he belonged in a dusty library, and in fact he did. "Ms. Whitaker," he said. "My name is Professor Ellis Calder. I'm with the Boston Historical Society. I hope I'm not intruding." Ruby eyed the satchel. "You here to sell history or defend it?" He smiled gently. "To remember it, and maybe, just maybe, protect it." She let him in. Ellis sat at the dining table beside the students from Harvard. He laid out his materials, slowly, reverently microfilm scans old court filings, photographs of protests, of marches, of weathered black men in coats, holding signs that read, "We built this city too." Then he held up a photo, grainy, black and white. 6 men and 2 women huddled in front of a wooden house. Ruby leaned forward. Her breath caught in her throat. "That's my porch," she whispered. Ellis nodded. "This house was a known safe house," he said, for early civil rights organizers in the 1940s and 50s, before the term civil rights was even widely used. This place, this was sanctuary. Your grandfather, James Whitaker, was a conduit. He sheltered traveling speakers, protected them during rallies, helped draft letters to lawmakers. He pulled out a sheet of parchment, one of the ones Ruby and Aiden had found in the basement. "This is one of the earliest known mentions of the Boston Freedom Circle," Ellis continued. "It's not just history. This is legacy." The law student sat stunned. Aiden looked at Ruby. "So, it's like your house was a superhero hideout." She smiled softly, "Something like that." Ellis folded his hands. "If we can authenticate the full collection, we can file for historical landmark protection under Section 9C of the State Heritage Act. It would mean by law they can't tear it down." Samira leaned in. "How long would that take?" "Depends on who we make angry," Ellis said, eyes twinkling. But the anger came faster than expected. That afternoon, a courier delivered a thick manila envelope to Ruby's door. Aiden opened it before she could even read the return address. His face paled. "It's from the developers," he said. "They're suing you." Ruby took the packet, unfolding the pages like one would handle a bomb. Her eyes moved slowly over the letterhead, the sharp legalese printed in black and red ink. Glenwood Developments, LLC, was filing formal civil charges against her for improper and unauthorized occupation of property, claiming she had knowingly maintained residence on land that had not been updated or reassessed in municipal records for over 40 years. They cited obscure zoning provisions and claimed damages for interference with redevelopment schedules. They were accusing her of stealing the land she'd been born on. Aiden's voice was tight. "They're saying you were never supposed to be here." Ruby felt something go cold in her chest. She sat down heavily, the pages sliding from her lap like ash. "They're trying to erase me," she whispered. That night, the house felt heavier. Every step creaked a little deeper. Every window seemed to groan against the wind. Ruby stayed quiet through dinner. Aiden picked at his plate, watching her. She looked thinner than usual, her skin paler. "You should eat more," he said. "I'm not hungry." He took her hand. It felt fragile, like a dry leaf. "Are you scared?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then barely a whisper, "I'm tired." Later that night, he found her in the living room, sitting in her father's rocking chair, arms wrapped around a quilt she didn't remember pulling over herself. The fire had burned low. The room smelled of old smoke and peppermint. She was asleep, at least he thought so, until she stirred and whispered, "Aiden." "I'm here," he said, crouching beside her. "I can feel it leaving me," she said, "piece by piece." "No," he said quickly. "You're just tired." "I don't want to go," she murmured. "Not yet, not like this." Aiden's throat closed. He threw his arms around her, pressing his face into her shoulder. "Please don't go," he whispered. "I don't want you to disappear like my mom did." She held him weak but still steady. "I'll fight," she said softly, "for as long as I can." He nodded against her chest. "You're not alone anymore," he said. The next morning, the Harvard students returned with copies of legal filings. They had drafted a preliminary injunction request to freeze Glenwood's construction permits pending historical review. It was a long shot, but it was a move. Ellis Calder had spoken to the State Preservation Office. He believed the evidence they'd found was enough to merit emergency consideration under cultural heritage laws. But Ruby didn't get up from her chair. She listened to their voices from the hallway, her eyes distant. Kayla walked over, crouched beside her. "We're going to buy you time," she said. "We'll make them listen." Ruby nodded, but her hand trembled as it reached for her tea. Aiden stayed beside her all day. He canceled school. He turned off his phone. He peeled apples for her and recited lines from a comic book like it was Shakespeare. That night, while she slept, he stood by the window watching the shadows move across Elmwood Street. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Somewhere closer, a dog barked and then fell silent. He turned back toward the room. The house smelled like lavender and wood smoke. Aiden curled into the armchair opposite Ruby and whispered to the dark, "Please let her stay. Just a little longer." In the stillness, the house held its breath and remembered. The courtroom was colder than Ruby expected. Marble floors, high ceilings, walls painted a sterile gray that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. It felt less like a room and more like a waiting room for judgment, clean, quiet, and cruel. At the front of the room, a heavy oak bench rose like a throne. Behind it sat Judge Harrington, a woman in her late 60s, silver hair pinned tightly, eyes sharp as ice picks. She had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings and an intolerance for grandstanding. Ruby respected that. To the left sat Glenwood Developments and their team, 4 attorneys in navy suits with patent leather briefcases and eyes that didn't blink. Their lead counsel was Miles Carrick, a tall man with a voice like polished gravel and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He had represented Fortune 500's multinational banks and now Glenwood. To the right, Ruby sat quietly beside Malcolm, Kayla, and Samira. The law students looked impossibly young against the polished cruelty of Carrick's team, but their eyes burned with the kind of purpose no salary could buy. Aiden sat in the second row, his hands gripping the bench so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He wore the only button-up shirt he owned, sleeves rolled, once hair combed into obedience. "All rise," the bailiff called. The judge entered, robes sweeping like storm clouds. "Be seated," she said. "Let's begin." The clerk read the case title: Glenwood Developments vs. Ruby Whitaker. Civil case, 2025 to 4138. Alleged unlawful occupation of property and obstruction of municipal development. The charges sounded sterile, but to Ruby they were an accusation that her entire life had been a mistake. Carrick rose first. "Your Honor," he began, smooth and steady, "my clients have lawfully acquired the rights to redevelop the area known as Elmwood East under zoning codes approved by the City Council. Every resident has accepted the terms save one." He turned slightly, gesturing toward Ruby without looking at her. "Ms. Whitaker, while no doubt a respected elder, has occupied this property without updated legal documentation for over 4 decades. She has ignored city codes, refused inspection, and now claims ownership based on unverified, antiquated paperwork of questionable authenticity." He let the silence fall heavy. "Progress, Your Honor, does not wait for nostalgia." He sat. The judge nodded. "Defense." Kayla rose. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling but clear, "we don't dispute the city's efforts toward modernization, but progress without memory is erasure. We intend to show that Ms. Whitaker's property holds not just personal value, but historical significance rooted in documented community agreements, some dating back over 150 years. We also contend that the documents in question are authentic and constitute a binding moral, if not legal, obligation." She took a breath. "This isn't about one woman's refusal to change. It's about one city's refusal to remember." The judge nodded again. "Proceed." One by one they presented the evidence. First, the map, dated 1867 with plots outlined and names inked in deliberate strokes. The judge studied it, head slightly tilted. Then the handwritten letter from Reverend Josiah Carter, addressed to James Whitaker, Ruby's grandfather, affirming the land's use as sanctuary. Then a series of black and white photographs civil rights leaders gathered in front of Ruby's porch banners held high eyes fierce. Ellis Calder, the historian, took the stand and testified to the authenticity of the documents, referencing preservation markers, ink composition, and archival cross-referencing. The house in question, he concluded, is not simply a home. It is one of the few remaining undocumented safe houses from Boston's early civil rights movement. Carrick stood and delivered his rebuttal like a surgeon. "Dr. Calder, are you aware that the zoning registry for this district was rewritten in 1981? "Yes." "And do any of these historical documents appear in the city's digital zoning archive post-1981? "No, they do not." "So by city records, the house exists without protected designation." "By city records, yes, but that's the problem." "Thank you, Dr. Calder." Then came the moment no one expected to come so soon. Defense calls Aiden Bryant to the stand. He froze. Malcolm turned and gave him a small nod. "You okay?" Aiden stood slowly, his legs unsteady. He took the oath with his right hand raised, voice cracking, "I do." He climbed into the chair that felt too big and too high. Kayla approached slowly, her tone gentle. "Aiden, can you tell the court how you know Miss Whitaker?" He looked at Ruby, then back at the judge. "She's my friend," he said. "She lets me come over sometimes when things are bad at home." "And what happened the day you found the documents?" Aiden took a shaky breath. "There was a storm. The power went out. We went into the basement to fix it. I saw a weird spot on the wall like the bricks didn't match. I pushed on it. It opened." He paused. "There was a box. Inside it were maps, old letters, pictures. Stuff I didn't understand at first, but it felt important." Ruby cried when she saw them. Carrick rose. "Mr. Bryant, are you a legal expert?" "No." "Have you ever handled historical documentation?" "No." "Do you know what constitutes a legally recognized deed?" "No." Carrick smiled thinly. "Then your testimony, while sweet, is emotional at best." Aiden leaned forward, his voice rising. "But I was there. I saw it. I helped scan it all. I watched her get scared when they sent the letters. I watched her get tired." Carrick opened his mouth to object, but Judge Harrington raised a hand. "Let him finish." Aiden's voice shook. "I saw her fight even when people said she was too old to matter. I saw her save pieces of history no one else even cared about. And I think, if that's not worth something in this court, then this court doesn't care about the truth." Silence. Ruby wiped a tear from her cheek. Kayla stepped forward. No further questions. The judge nodded. You may step down, Mr. Bryant. He returned to his seat beside Ruby, burying his face in her arm. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered. Some held mics, others held questions, but everyone held opinions. Inside, the energy had shifted. Half the courtroom nodded as Aiden spoke. The other half frowned, tight-lipped neighbors, angry developers, those who believed Ruby stood in the way of progress of new condos and rising property values. The judge recessed for the day. As Ruby stood to leave, a woman approached her in the aisle. 60 maybe, elegant scarf, pearl earrings. My father was in the Freedom Circle, the woman said softly. They used to talk about a house in Elmwood. I never knew it still stood. Ruby blinked. They said it was where they wrote their songs. Then the woman was gone, and Ruby stood there in the middle of the aisle, the weight of generations pressing down, but not to crush her, to lift her. History wasn't quiet. It was finally speaking. The courtroom smelled of worn carpet and fresh betrayal. It was the second week of proceedings, and everything had begun to slow. Legal filings, procedural delays, evidence debates, all the gears grinding forward, exhausting everyone but the attorneys. Ruby sat still, one hand gripping her cane, the other balled in her lap. She knew something was coming. She felt it in her bones before it happened. The prosecution called its next witness, Mrs. Lorraine Keats. The name dropped like a stone in Ruby's chest. Lorraine, her neighbor, her friend of nearly 40 years. The woman who used to bring her peonies every spring, who once held Ruby's hand the day her husband passed. They had baked together, watched snowfall together, gossiped about squirrels like teenagers. Lorraine had wept beside her when Ruby's mother died. Now she stepped into the witness box in a stiff blazer, a red scarf too bright for mourning. She didn't look at Ruby as she raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. Carrick approached slowly like a vulture ready to pick from familiar bone. Mrs. Keats. How long have you known the defendant? Lorraine cleared her throat. 42 years. And how would you describe your relationship? Friendly, neighborly. And have you ever witnessed any unusual activity in Ms. Whitaker's home? Ruby's mouth dropped open slightly. Lorraine hesitated. She always kept to herself. But in recent years I noticed she had stopped paying attention to the yard, let her roof rot, refused to attend the homeowners' meetings. Carrick nodded like it was exactly the answer he expected. Would you say she became isolated? Yes. And angry too. Bitter. When the plans for redevelopment were announced, she lashed out, accused everyone of betrayal. Ruby's face flushed. And did she ever, to your knowledge, mention that she had legal documentation proving ownership of the land? No, Lorraine said quickly, not once. She never discussed historical significance or letters or maps. Never. Carrick paused, letting the weight of that word settle. Thank you, Mrs. Keats. No further questions. Kayla approached slowly, like walking across ice. Mrs. Keats, did Miss Whitaker ever ask for your help? Lorraine blinked. She told me once she was scared, that she felt alone. And did you help her? Lorraine said nothing. Did you go see the basement? The documents? No. Did you ask to? No. Do you regret that now? Silence. No further questions. Lorraine stepped down, still not meeting Ruby's eyes. The betrayal hurt more than the lawsuit. Ruby sat frozen, pulse pounding in her ears. It wasn't just the city. It wasn't just the developers. It was her. They were cutting her from the roots. That evening, headlines swarmed elderly woman hoards historical land amid legal questions. Is Ruby Whitaker just a nostalgic squatter, the war on progress? One woman's refusal to let go. The Boston Sentinel ran an editorial that questioned whether emotional attachment should outweigh civic progress. Ruby's mailbox filled with hate mail. Her voicemail blinked with anonymous threats, sarcastic condolences, and twisted accusations. She shut off the ringer. Then the call came from the social services office. Aiden has been picked up, the woman said, voice sterile. Loitering. No adult supervision on file. He's been placed in temporary custody. Ruby nearly dropped the phone. You can't. He's not a criminal. He's a child. He's a minor without legal guardianship. We had no choice. You had every choice, Ruby snapped. You just didn't choose the right one. She slammed the phone down, hands trembling. She called Malcolm, but there was nothing he could do. I'll make calls, he promised. But they're claiming it's a welfare issue now. That night the house was too quiet. The kettle boiled itself dry on the stove. The clock ticked like a countdown in her ears. She tried to call the shelter, no answer. Tried to call Kayla voicemail. She sat on the edge of the couch, gripping the last photo she had of Aiden, his smile crooked one shoelace untied. Her chest ached, her body sagged, her will cracked at the edges. She pulled out a pad of paper from the drawer, an old fountain pen. Her hands trembled as she began to write. To whomever finds this, I tried. The words bled across the page. She paused, staring at the ink like it might pull her in. So many pages, so many trials, so many people telling her she was small, irrelevant, outdated. She thought about the tree her father planted, about her mother's worn recipes, still stained with tomato sauce, about the echo of jazz that used to play in this living room on Sunday mornings. Then her eyes fell on the bookshelf. Tucked between heavy legal volumes and her favorite gardening guides was a paperback. The spine was bent, the pages dog-eared. The Little Prince. She pulled it down slowly. Aiden's name was scribbled inside the cover in orange marker. Inside, folded into Chapter 5, was a napkin, crumpled, greasy. She opened it. I like being here with you. You see things that matter. Ruby's breath caught. She stared at the napkin, at the crooked handwriting, and then back at the unfinished letter. She tore it in half, then again, and again, until nothing remained but paper snow. She rose slowly, but with purpose. The fight wasn't over. She would not leave him. Not yet. It started with a buzz. Not a roar, not a siren. Just a short, quiet vibration on Malcolm's phone during a midnight strategy meeting in Ruby's living room. The law students had been reviewing court transcripts and prepping for cross-examinations when Malcolm's screen lit up with a message from an anonymous account. He opened it, then froze. "Guys," he whispered, "you need to see this." He turned the phone toward Kayla and Samira. On screen, a grainy video clip time-stamped 3 weeks prior inside a sleek glass conference room. The Glenwood Developments logo glowed faintly on a wall-mounted TV. Around the table sat 3 men and a woman, 2 in business suits, one in a golf polo, the other in pearls. In the center, Miles Carrick, the lead attorney. The camera was clearly hidden, the angle slightly tilted, the sound slightly muffled, but audible enough. Carrick leaned forward, voice low and smug. "Listen, the inheritance records for that Whitaker property are a mess. If we cede a restated deed into the file old date grandfather clause, we can argue it was reassigned during a clerical sweep in the 80s. One of the others laughed. "You're talking forged title records. I'm talking survivable, plausible deniability. By the time it's challenged, we'll have laid concrete." Another voice. And the old woman, Carrick again. "She doesn't have the muscle or the money to keep this alive. She's nostalgia in a bathrobe." Malcolm's mouth went dry. Ruby sat frozen in her chair. Kayla whispered, "Play it again." They did, 3 times. Samira was already texting her professor. "This is evidence. This is malpractice. This is fraud." Ruby just stared ahead, hands trembling on her lap. They planned it," she said, the words catching in her throat. They knew. The next morning, Malcolm uploaded the clip anonymously, first to a legal watchdog blog, then to Twitter, then Reddit, then every contact he could find in journalism. Within hours, the buzz became a wildfire. Breaking, Glenwood attorney caught on tape. Plotting document forgery in land battle. Plausible deniability. Leaked video exposes developer corruption. The clip aired on 3 local news stations by sundown. By midnight, a national investigative program had picked it up, and by dawn, something Ruby never expected happened. The Boston Morning Herald published a front-page retraction. They had previously run an op-ed labeling her a reluctant relic, but now under bold letters that read, "We got it wrong." They told her story in full. The photo accompanying the article showed Ruby on her porch, a hand resting gently on Aiden's shoulder, a copy of The Little Prince in her lap. The media for once had found its spine, and it turned. That same day, Ruby received a call from Family Services. "We reviewed your emergency guardianship petition," the voice on the other end said. Ruby gripped the phone tightly, and, "We're granting it, Ms. Whitaker. Effective immediately. Aiden Bryant is being released from temporary custody and returned to your care." She didn't cry at first. She just exhaled as if finally remembering how to breathe again. 2 hours later, she stood at the gate of the group home. The building was gray and square and full of kids trying not to disappear. But Aiden saw her the second the door opened. He ran. She caught him, knees buckling slightly beneath the weight of him, arms wrapping tightly around his small, shaking body. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. "I'm never letting them take you again," she whispered back. Back at home, Aiden clung to her like a shadow. He helped carry wood for the stove. He reheated soup. He refused to sleep in his own bed and instead curled up on the floor beside hers. "Are they still coming after you?" he asked. "Maybe," she said. "But now we've got a few more people on our side." Indeed, the tides had shifted. The mayor's office released a statement announcing an internal ethics review of all development contracts related to Glenwood. Public outrage boiled. Protesters marched outside City Hall with signs reading, "History is not for sale. Don't bulldoze her story. Ruby stays." And then the court responded. A judge ordered an immediate injunction on Glenwood's redevelopment plans for the entire Elmwood East District, pending further investigation. But more than that, a new designation was issued: temporary cultural landmark status, 203 Elmwood Street. Ruby stood on her porch the day the placard arrived. It came in a plain envelope. No ceremony, no media crew, just a single sheet of paper with a city seal and 5 small words: "This house will be protected." She pinned it to the wall beside the door, then turned to Aiden. "Want to see what hope looks like?" He grinned. "Is it soup?" She laughed, the first real laugh in weeks. "No kid, it's this porch, still standing." Later that evening, as the sun bled out over the rooftops, the house filled with people. Students, professors, reporters, neighbors, some who once doubted, some who still felt shame. They brought flowers, books, homemade pies. One woman brought a painting of the oak tree. The air smelled like lemon balm and roasted apples. Ellis Calder raised a glass of cider. "To Ruby Whitaker," he said, "a keeper of stories, a protector of truth, and proof that age does not mean silence." They clinked glasses. Aiden whispered, "I think your house might be magic." Ruby smiled. "No, I think we just remembered how to listen." Outside, the wind rustled through the oak tree, scattering leaves like confetti. Inside, Ruby stood a little taller. The game had changed, and this time it was her move. The courtroom was full, not just with lawyers and press, but with people. Ordinary people, neighbors, students, elders, even a group of 5th graders from a nearby school holding handmade signs. "Justice for Ruby," one read, "Another history has a home." Judge Harrington entered quietly as always, but her face held something different today, not just authority, but gravity. She looked at Ruby as if measuring the weight of what had been fought for and what had almost been lost. "Please be seated," she said. The courtroom fell into stillness. "This court has reviewed all evidence, including historical documentation testimony from experts and the recently submitted video recording involving Glenwood Developments and its legal counsel." She paused. The room held its breath. "It is the opinion of this court that the documentation recovered from the Whitaker property, though long hidden, is authentic, historically significant, and materially relevant to land ownership." Carrick shifted in his seat. "This court recognizes Ms. Ruby Whitaker as the rightful legal owner of 203 Elmwood Street. Furthermore, Glenwood Developments is hereby ordered to cease all activity related to Elmwood East, pending a criminal investigation into document fraud, collusion, and attempted unlawful seizure of historic property." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Ruby didn't smile. She closed her eyes. It wasn't joy she felt, it was release. Like a thread that had pulled tight across decades had finally snapped loose. Outside the courthouse, flashbulbs popped. Microphones were shoved forward. She didn't stop for any of them. She simply took Aiden's hand, squeezed it, and walked away from the noise. Back home, the mailbox overflowed. But this time it wasn't threats or legal notices. It was letters. Some from strangers. Some from old friends. One from Lorraine Keats. "I was wrong," it read. "And I'm sorry, I see that now." She didn't know if she would ever forgive Lorraine, but she read the letter twice, then placed it gently in the drawer where she kept Aiden's drawings. The Boston Daily ran a headline in gold font, "The Guardian of Elmwood." Beneath it, a photo of Ruby standing on her porch, sunlight on her silver hair. Aiden beside her, one arm wrapped around her waist. She looked like someone who had just stepped out of a history book, only she was still writing it. The next week, Ruby made her announcement. It wasn't grand, no podium, no city officials. Just a folding chair on her lawn, Aiden standing beside her, and about 30 curious neighbors gathered to listen. "This house has stood for a long time," she began, voice steady. "It's held secrets, and it's held truth. It's sheltered strangers, it's buried pain, it's witnessed joy." She looked toward the children sitting cross-legged on the grass. "It's time it belonged to more than just me." She unfolded a single sheet of paper typed notarized. "I'm donating the home under a protected preservation clause to serve as a free community library and reading space for local children. Forever." Applause broke out, gentle but rising. "I won't live forever," she added. "But maybe if we fill this place with books and stories and music, maybe something like hope will." Aiden blinked up at her. "So, it's a library now." She laughed. "It's still your room in the back." He grinned. "Can I be librarian?" "You already are." In the weeks that followed, donations poured in books, beanbags, old computers. A muralist painted the front wall with vines and stars, and a giant oak tree whose roots stretched into pages of open books. A local carpenter offered to build custom shelves. A former English teacher offered reading classes. Aiden organized the chapter books by color. Ruby arranged the poetry. The day of the dedication, the mayor came, the press came, even the principal from Aiden's school. But the most important moment came in a quiet room in the family court. Judge Parnell, a soft-spoken man with crow's feet and coffee breath, looked over his glasses at Ruby and Aiden. "You understand this is permanent," he said. "Legal guardianship. You'll be his full-time guardian in the eyes of the law." Ruby nodded. Aiden stared at his shoes, then blurted, "Do I have to change my name?" The judge raised a brow. "That's up to you." Aiden looked up at Ruby. She smiled. "Only if you want to." He thought for a long moment, then nodded. "Yeah," he said, "I want to." The judge signed the papers. "Congratulations, Aiden Whitaker." Ruby choked on a laugh, tears forming fast. Aiden grinned so wide it almost hurt to look at. That evening at the library opening, Ruby stood beneath a string of paper lanterns. Her dress was blue. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a microphone someone insisted she use. The crowd parted. Aiden walked forward holding a frame. Inside it, the original map from 1867, preserved behind glass, signed by Reverend Carter, restored, labeled, "Land promised, land kept." He handed it to her, whispering for the wall. She couldn't speak. She just nodded and pulled him close. Later, as kids laughed in the garden and parents sipped cider on the porch, Ruby stepped inside and ran her hand across the wall where the hidden compartment had once been. It was sealed now, but she still knew where it was. History had lived there. Now it breathed. And beside her now and always stood a boy with her name. Whitaker. Not just a name anymore. A legacy. The sun dipped low at the end of Elmwood Street, painting the sky in streaks of apricot and lavender. Warm light spilled through the lace curtains of the once-forgotten house, now reborn with purpose. Inside the library was alive. The name carved into the wooden arch above the doorway read, "The Elmwood Oak, a Home for Stories." Below it in delicate cursive was a line Aiden had chosen, planted in truth. Grown in hope. Books lined every wall. Tales from every continent. Children's fables, historical volumes, and worn poetry collections. In the center of the main room stood the original oak table from Ruby's dining room, now scrubbed and varnished. It served as a reading station, a storytelling table, a space where silence was never lonely, only reverent. Ruby sat in her favorite armchair by the fireplace, her voice weaving through the room like a gentle wind. And so the little prince looked up at the stars and whispered to his rose, "You are beautiful, but you are empty. No one could die for you." The children sat on colorful pillows, their eyes wide, their bodies still. Even the noisy ones listened. She closed the book softly and looked up. Aiden sat in the corner with his harmonica, one leg bouncing nervously. When she gave him a wink, he raised the instrument to his lips and played. It was a melody Ruby knew well, something quiet and wistful, something his mother used to hum when she thought no one was listening, a tune that made the room feel like it had memory, like it had heartbeats. When he finished, the children clapped, unsure why their chests felt warm. Ruby clapped too, then tapped the chair beside her. He came. They sat together for a moment, just watching the fire dance. "Think they'll come back tomorrow?" he asked. She smiled. "They'll bring more friends." He nodded like he already knew. That weekend, a group of college students from Emerson and Harvard knocked on the door. They introduced themselves, librarians in training, education majors, history buffs. One of them, a shy boy with thick glasses, said, "We were wondering if we could maybe volunteer here." Ruby looked at them for a moment, tired eyes assessing, amused. "You want to alphabetize shelves and get sneezed on by second graders?" The girl in front nodded earnestly. "Yes, ma'am." Ruby turned to Aiden. "Well," he grinned, "we could use some help organizing the fairy tales." Ruby looked back at the group. "Then welcome home," she said. "No one's paid and the tea is instant, but the stories are real." The door stayed open that day and every day after, and something else began to change. The children from this block, once the ones who crossed the street to avoid the old witch's house, started showing up in pairs, then in groups, then in a full cluster of sneakers and backpacks and loud giggles. They'd run up the porch, knock politely, and say things like, "Is the reading lady here? Can I borrow the dog book again? Do you have any new space stories?" Ruby learned all their names, and they learned hers. Not crazy old lady. Not that weird woman in the broken house. Just Miss Ruby. Every afternoon at 4, they'd line up outside with borrowed books in hand, ready to return and check out more. They came from apartment buildings, shelters, quiet homes, and noisy ones. Some had never seen a book that wasn't a worksheet. Now they clutched graphic novels and world atlases like treasure maps. One afternoon, a boy named Elijah shyly handed her a picture he'd drawn a tree with book pages for leaves. At the base stood a small house with glowing windows. "This is the place where stories live," he said. She framed it, hung it right by the door. People brought cookies, board games, folding chairs. A bus driver stopped by on her break to read aloud. A retired nurse offered to run a first aid class on weekends. One of the law students from the trial came back to donate books in memory of her grandmother. Ruby didn't ask for any of it, but she accepted it all. One night, after the last child had gone and the porch light was dimmed, Ruby sat with Aiden on the back steps. The garden was overgrown but peaceful. Crickets chirped like they were keeping time. "You think it'll last?" he asked. Ruby took a long breath. "Nothing lasts," she said, "but some things stay." She looked at him. "You stayed." He leaned against her shoulder. "I belong here," he said. She smiled. "Me too." The moon rose slowly, catching the edges of the house's new white paint glinting off the window panes. Somewhere a dog barked and someone laughed in the distance. Inside the shelves stood tall the books waiting, and at the edge of Elmwood Street the house glowed like a lighthouse. Not haunted anymore, not forgotten, but remembered, and full of light. The air was soft that evening, quiet, as if even the wind knew not to interrupt. Ruby sat beneath the old oak tree, its massive limbs casting long shadows that reached toward the house like protective arms. Her shawl draped over her shoulders, a book resting in her lap. The grass beneath her was warm from the day's sun. Aiden leaned against the trunk beside her, his knees pulled to his chest, eyes fixed on the pages of his own book. They read in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because nothing needed to be said. The house stood behind them, glowing amber in the sinking sun, its white-painted frame bathed in golden light. From a distance it looked like a photograph come to life, one of those sepia-toned portraits framed in history museums, only this one still breathed. A few children laughed faintly somewhere in the neighborhood, and a bicycle bell rang once in the distance. But beneath the tree, time was still. Aiden closed his book. He looked up at Ruby, then at the house. "Do you ever think about what it would have been like if you'd given up?" Ruby didn't look away from her book, but her smile formed slowly. "I try not to," she said. "It's not a place worth visiting." He nodded. "I think I almost did too, back when they took me away." Ruby turned to him. "But you didn't. You didn't either." A silence passed between them, heavy but kind. The cicadas began to sing. A soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead. The camera pulls back slowly first, revealing the wide patch of green around them, then the full view of the house. On its porch, wind chimes danced lazily in the breeze. Along the front walkway, marigolds bloomed in careful rows. Further out, more homes appeared, streets winding, a neighborhood quietly exhaling. As the drone lifts higher, the sprawl of Boston comes into view, its brick buildings and bay windows, church spires and schoolyards, and finally the whole scene catches the last golden kiss of sunlight before twilight. And Ruby's voice begins warm, low, like the closing of a well-worn book. Justice is not something that falls from the sky. The screen darkens slightly. Her voice continues. It begins when one person decides not to stay silent. Cut to black. A single line appears on screen, inspired by the untold stories of silent land reclamation battles across America. Then a brief moment of silence, a soft rustle. Then Aiden's voice, young steady, rises from the dark, reading from the first book Ruby ever gave him. The one she read on that first quiet evening under the flickering light. What is essential is invisible to the eye. Pause. Then he adds softly, but it's always there if you know where to look. A final chord of harmonica plays faintly in the background, his tune. His mother's tune. Now his legacy. Fade out. The screen fades to the credits. But before the music swells, the last image returns for just a second. Ruby and Aiden still under the tree, leaning together, eyes closed. Two souls from different times stitched together by truth and choice. The house watches over them, and so does the oak, a place once nearly lost, now forever home.